The knock came at 2 a.m., 3 sharp raps that made Ernesto Luna's heart stop before it started racing. He'd been expecting it. His contact in Ecuador had said someone would come for him at the motel. But standing in that dingy room in Eagle Pass, Texas, wearing nothing but boxers and a t-shirt, something felt wrong. The man on the other side of the door wasn't knocking like someone conducting business. He was knocking like someone who knew you had nowhere to run. Ernesto opened the door. The fine man, who looked nothing like the coyote, described him. Too well-dressed, too calm, too focused on Ernesto's face rather than quick transportation cross borders. The man smiled, showing gold teeth that caught the fluorescent motel lighting, and spoke 5 words that changed everything. Get dressed. You're coming with me. But to understand how a 24-year-old restaurant worker from Quito ended up in that motel room, facing a predator instead of guide, you need to go back 3 weeks to when desperation made every promise sound like salvation. Ernesto had left Ecuador with $10,000, his family's entire savings plus loans from relatives who believed his promise to send money back. The plan was simple. Reach Houston, where his cousin managed a restaurant and had a job waiting. Good wages, steady work, a chance to pay back debts and build something better. The journey north had eaten through money faster than expected. Bribes at borders, bus tickets, food, shelter. By the time he reached Mexico, half was gone. In Mexico City, he met other Ecuadorians heading north who warned him about the border. You needed a good coyote, they said. Someone reliable. Someone who wouldn't abandon you in the desert or sell you to cartels. Through whispered conversations in migrant hostels, a name emerged. El Primo. Not the cheapest, but supposedly the safest. He didn't do mass crossings or dangerous routes. Small groups, careful planning, higher success rate. Worth the extra cost for someone carrying their family's hopes. The connection came through Ernesto's friend from Quito, Miguel, who'd successfully crossed 6 months earlier. Miguel vouched for the operation, said El Primo's people had treated him well, delivered him safely to Houston. Call this number, Miguel said. Ask for Raul. Tell him I sent you. They'll take care of everything. The voice on the phone was professional, reassuring. Yes, they knew Miguel. Good worker, sending money home regularly. They could help Ernesto follow the same path. $6,000 would cover everything. Crossing, transportation to Houston, even temporary documentation. Meet their representative in Eagle Pass, Texas. Yes, Texas. Ernesto would cross legally on a temporary visa, then be transported to Houston. Safer than desert crossings. No risk. It should have been his first warning. Why would he need a coyote if he was crossing legally? But desperation makes logic fuzzy, and the plan sounded sophisticated enough to be real. He'd cross at a legal checkpoint with papers the organization would provide, then disappear into America's interior. Happened all the time, the voice assured him. Ernesto took buses to Piedras Negras, the Mexican city across from Eagle Pass. At the bridge, another surprise, he really did cross legally. A tourist visa, somehow obtained, allowing him 72 hours in the United States. The border agent barely looked at him, just stamped the passport and waved him through. That easy. He was in America. The motel was exactly where they'd said, a rundown place that rented by the hour and didn't ask questions. Room 117, paid for 3 days. Wait there. Someone would come at night with final instructions for reaching Houston. Don't leave the room. Don't call anyone. Just wait. For 2 days, he waited, ate delivery food, watched American television. He couldn't understand. Counted his remaining money, for $1,000 hidden in various places. Enough to start his new life once he reached his cousin. On the second night, he finally relaxed enough to sleep deeply. Then came the knock. The man in the doorway was a Mexican or Central American like most coyotes. Eastern European accent, expensive clothes, the build of someone who hurt people professionally. He looked at Ernesto like a butcher evaluating meat. When Ernesto hesitated, asking about El Primo and Raul, the man's smile grew wider. There had been a change in management. He explained. El Primo had sold his routes to new partners. More efficient operation, better connections. Same destination, just different methods. Now get dressed. The van was waiting. Time was money in this business. Ernesto wanted to refuse, to demand answers, to call Miguel for confirmation. But he was alone in a Texas motel room at 2 a.m. with an expired tourist visa and a man who clearly wasn't used to hearing no. His choices had narrowed compliance or violence, and violence would leave him nowhere good. He dressed quickly, packed his few belongings, felt the hidden money against his skin like a secret the man already knew. The parking lot was empty, except for a black van with tinted windows. No license plates. The side door slid open to reveal 2 more men and 3 young women who looked as confused and frightened as Ernesto felt. The drive lasted hours. Highway at first, then smaller roads, then dirt paths that led nowhere official. The man from the motel sat in front, making calls in a language Ernesto didn't recognize. Russian maybe, or something similar. The women whispered among themselves in Spanish. They'd been promised restaurant work, cleaning jobs, legitimate employment. Like Ernesto, they'd trusted the wrong people. Dawn revealed flat landscape that could have been anywhere in Texas, or Oklahoma, or any of the states Ernesto couldn't locate on a map. They stopped at a compound. High fences, security cameras, buildings that looked agricultural from outside, but held darker purposes within. This wasn't a way station to Houston. This was a destination. Inside, the truth emerged quickly. No cousin waiting in Houston. No restaurant job. No legitimate anything. The tourist visa had been just bait to get him across legally, avoiding the scrutiny that came with border jumping. Now, he was merchandise in a different economy, one that traded in human bodies for various purposes. The man from the motel, they called him Viktor, explained the situation with the patience of someone who'd given this speech before. Ernesto owed them now. Transportation costs, visa fees, room and board. The debt would be worked off through various enterprises. Some people worked in fields, some in factories, some in more personal services. Viktor would evaluate skills and assign accordingly. But first, documentation. Not the kind that made you legal. The kind that made you trackable. Photos from multiple angles. Fingerprints. Personal history. Family back home, names and addresses. All recorded, all filed, all potential leverage. Cooperation meant comfort. Resistance meant consequences, and not just for Ernesto. He thought about running that first night. The compound wasn't prison. People came and went, conducting whatever business kept the operation profitable. But where would he run to? He didn't know what state he was in. Had no identification except an expired tourist visa. No money they hadn't already found and confiscated. No phone. No friends within 1,000 miles, except a cousin who thought he was still coming. The others adapted at different speeds. The women disappeared into one building. Their purposes obvious from men who visited at night. Other men were loaded into trucks each morning, returning exhausted after dark. Agricultural work. They said, though some came back with injuries that suggested construction or more dangerous labor. Viktor seemed to have special plans for Ernesto. Young, reasonably attractive, educated enough to speak basic English. These were marketable qualities in certain industries. For 2 weeks, they kept him separated from the others, fed him better, had a doctor examine him thoroughly, preparing him for something, though Viktor wouldn't say what. The fake passport appeared on a Tuesday. Good quality work with Ernesto's photo, but a different name. American citizen, born in Texas, complete backstory provided. He'd need to memorize it all, Viktor explained. His new identity for his new life. Clients preferred documentation, even if everyone involved knew it was fiction. That's when Ernesto understood. Not field work or construction. He was being prepared for the same fate as the women, just marketed to a different clientele. The passport was to make clients feel safer, more legitimate about their transactions. An American citizen couldn't be trafficked after all. The paperwork said so. The realization broke something in him. Not his body or spirit. Those would come later if he stayed. But his acceptance of the situation, his passive hope that compliance would lead somewhere survivable. That night he made a decision. He'd rather die attempting escape than live as what they planned to make him. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Viktor decided Ernesto needed clothes appropriate for his new role, took him to a shopping center 2 towns over, confident that isolation and fear would prevent any escape attempt. What was Ernesto going to do? Run to police with no legal status? Approach strangers speaking broken English? Viktor had 2 men with him, but they waited in the van, equally confident in Ernesto's helplessness. Inside the department store, Viktor selected clothes while Ernesto obediently tried them on. Silk shirts, tight jeans, clothing designed to display rather than conceal. Viktor paid cash, chatting with a clerk about his nephew starting a new job. All very normal, very American, very much a lie everyone pretended to believe. In the parking lot, Viktor made his mistake. Sent Ernesto to throw away the old clothes in a dumpster around the corner while he loaded the van. 30 seconds of solitude, the first in 2 weeks. Ernesto didn't hesitate, dropped the clothes and ran. Not toward the road where they'd easily catch him, into the sprawl of big box stores and strip malls that bordered the shopping center, through parking lots between buildings, using cars and dumpsters as cover. He could hear Viktor shouting, then engine starting, but he kept moving. A delivery truck provided salvation. Back door open while the driver wheeled boxes into a restaurant. Ernesto climbed in, burrowed behind stack supplies, pulled a tarp over himself. Heard voices outside, Viktor's men searching, cursing in multiple languages. The truck door slammed shut minutes later, engine starting, moving. He stayed hidden for what felt like hours, but was probably 30 minutes. When the truck finally stopped and the driver discovered him, Ernesto did the only thing he could: begged. No police, please. Just let him out anywhere. He was nobody, would cause no problems, just needed distance from bad people. The driver, an older Mexican man who'd seen enough to recognize desperation, asked no questions. Dropped him at a truck stop 20 miles down the highway. Gave him $20 and a bottle of water. Told him about a homeless shelter in the next town that didn't check papers. Then drove away, leaving Ernesto alone in America. The shelter was real, run by a church that believed in helping without questioning. Ernesto became just another face among the homeless, the addicted, the abandoned. He told no one about Viktor or the compound or the fake passport he'd memorized and left behind. Told them he'd lost his ID, was trying to get home to Ecuador. Partial truths that earned sympathy without scrutiny. Days became weeks. The shelter helped him get kitchen work at a restaurant that paid cash. He saved every penny, sleeping at the shelter, eating leftovers, becoming invisible in the way only the undocumented perfect. No one looked for him. Viktor had either written him off as a loss or was searching in the wrong places. 6 months later, he finally had enough for a bus ticket to Houston. Found his cousin, who'd given him up for dead, told a story about getting robbed at the border, losing everything, working his way across Texas. More partial truths that avoided the full horror of what almost happened. His cousin got him work in the restaurant kitchen. Paid cash, no questions asked. Ernesto learned to cook, learned better English, learned to live with the knowledge of what waited in compounds across America for those who trusted the wrong voices on the phone. He never contacted Miguel back in Ecuador. What would he say? That the referral had led not to El Primo but to Viktor? That the safe crossing was bait for human trafficking? That he escaped by pure luck while others remained trapped? Some truths were too heavy to share across borders. Years passed. Ernesto saved money but never tried to legalize his status. Too risky, too many databases where Viktor's people might still be looking. He remained in Houston's shadows, cooking food for people who never saw him, sending small amounts home when possible, carrying the weight of that motel room encounter. Sometimes he'd see news reports about trafficking rings being busted. Always watched for Viktor's face among the arrested, never saw it. Men like that had layers of protection, pawns to sacrifice while they remained free. The compounds continued operating, just with different guards, different victims, different fake passports. His family in Ecuador thought he was successful. Regular remittances, even if small, proved America had been worth the journey. They didn't know about the motel, the compound, the 2 weeks when he'd been groomed for sale. Didn't know their $10,000 had nearly purchased his destruction instead of his dreams. The restaurant work was hard, but honest. Ernesto became a good cook, then a great one. The owner, understanding the value of undocumented workers who couldn't complain or leave, paid him fairly. Not legally, but fairly. He rented a small apartment, bought a used car, built a life that looked normal from outside. But he never forgot Viktor's face. The gold teeth, the evaluating eyes, the calm certainty of a man who traded in human misery. Never forgot the women in the van. Disappeared into whatever purpose the compound assigned. Never forgot how easily trust became trap. How a phone call to help could lead to ownership by strangers. He met others with similar stories. Houston was full of them. People who'd paid for passage and received slavery, who'd trusted countrymen and found predators, who'd crossed borders seeking work and discovered that some work destroyed more than poverty ever could. They recognized each other by what they didn't say, by the careful way they navigated American life. 10 years after the motel, Ernesto still worked in kitchens, still undocumented, still careful. He'd learned to live with incompleteness, never fully legal, never fully safe, never fully free from the memory of almost becoming merchandise. The fake passport Viktor had created probably still existed somewhere, waiting to be used by someone else desperate enough to believe documentation meant safety. Sometimes new arrivals asked him for advice. Young men from Ecuador or elsewhere, full of hope and desperation in equal measure. He told them to be careful, to verify everything, to trust no one completely. But he knew they'd make their own mistakes, trust their own wrong voices, possibly end up in their own compounds being prepared for sale. The border was more than a line between countries. It was a marketplace where human need met human greed and created industries of exploitation. Ernesto had crossed legally and nearly been destroyed. Others crossed illegally and found legitimate work. The randomness of it all, who you trusted, which door you knocked on, what motel you waited in, made advice almost meaningless. He still sent money home when possible, still called his mother on her birthday, still pretended America had been everything they dreamed when they gathered that $10,000. The truth, that he'd been one shopping trip away from a life of forced prostitution, would help no one. Better to let them believe in the success story than know the nightmare it almost became. Viktor was still out there somewhere, maybe arrested, maybe dead, maybe still answering motel doors at 2 a.m. to collect human cargo. The compound probably still operated under new management. The fake passport still provided illusions of legitimacy to crimes everyone pretended not to see. The system continued with different players, but same rules, same traps, same people discovering too late that some borders led not to freedom but to ownership. Ernesto Luna had paid $10,000 to reach America, had trusted a friend's recommendation, had waited in a motel as instructed. The man who knocked wasn't the coyote he'd expected, but a trafficker who saw him as product to be processed and sold. He'd escaped through luck and desperation, but thousands of others hadn't, wouldn't, couldn't. Now he cooked in a Houston restaurant, illegal but free, traumatized but surviving, forever carrying the knowledge of how close he'd come to disappearing into America's shadow economy, where people were bought and sold while everyone looked away. The motel room in Eagle Pass haunted him. That moment when the knock came and he'd open the door to find not salvation, but slavery smiling back with gold teeth. Some borders, once crossed, led to places you could never fully leave. Some knocks, once answered, echoed forever. Ernesto had escaped Viktor, but would never escape the knowledge of what waited in compounds across America for those who trusted the wrong voice on the phone, waited in the wrong motel, opened the wrong door at 2 a.m. He was in America. He was alive. He was free. All three statements were true and incomplete, like his documents, like his story, like the life he'd built on the ashes of what had almost consumed him. The man at the motel hadn't been the coyote. He'd been something worse. And Ernesto would spend the rest of his life being grateful for the 30 seconds in a parking lot when he'd chosen to run rather than comply, to risk death rather than accept the fate Viktor had planned. $10,000. One knock at 2 a.m. 2 weeks in a compound. A lifetime of looking over his shoulder. That was the real price of crossing borders in a world where desperation made people valuable and trust could be the most dangerous currency of all.